Hey everyone. Whoa. Wow. Oh, okay. Huh? Wow. What? This is my reaction to episodes 1 and 2 of Foundation on Apple TV, based on the novels, of course, by Isaac Asimov. Let's get started. I'm Luigi, welcome to Foundation Era. I'm just going to start out with my general first impressions of the series. I think this is a very promising start, a great introduction in a lot of ways. There are a couple of nitpicky things I have, and I will get into those. But really, this show, in its first episode, delivered what I think so many of us have imagined for decades. The names are the same as the books. The scale of the problems was conveyed well. And of course, there were some creative risks and decisions made. Let's get into breaking those down. After seeing the first 2 episodes, you might forget about the very first several minutes of the series. There are these kids and they're trying to get to the Selden Vault, but they're stopped by what they're calling the Null Field. To close that scene, Gail Dornick's narration comes back in. 9 minutes and 10 seconds into episode 1, she says the first line that really kind of gave me the shakes. She goes,
Salvor Hardin, Hober Mallow, the Mule. I would learn these names one day.
And that line really hit my soul because hearing those names read out loud so many years after I first read them was pretty amazing. But the line itself also implies that Gail is going to learn about those figures, even though some of them live far in the future from her. How is this possible? These 2 episodes don't answer that explicitly, but one of the last scenes at the end of episode 2 could offer an opening. Now, first, let's really get into the spoiler-heavy stuff. So if you haven't watched these first 2 episodes of Foundation, you really should before watching the rest of this video. Now, yeah, Gail Dornick gets shoved into an escape pod in the middle of nowhere in space. And a thought occurred to me at that moment that she may be put into some kind of cryogenic sleep, or something that allows her to be preserved alive and discovered much later. This isn't an entirely new concept. Arthur C. Clarke's 3001 Space Odyssey, that's the 4th and final novel of that series, is predicated on that kind of scenario in which a lost astronaut from the first mission in 2001 is brought back to Earth 1,000 years after his supposed death. It's a great book, by the way. Now, leading up to this premiere, we've heard that a big task on Foundation's creator and executive producer David Goyer was that he had to write the show in a way that would have main characters stay relevant through the years. Now, I don't necessarily blame him. From what I've seen so far, there is great talent in this show. I already really like these characters. But on the other hand, how do you explain how Gail could learn of the Mule or Mallow? Did she read about them when she analyzed the Prime Radiant? I don't know if that makes sense to me, so we'll see what that means. Certainly, such specific names and characters couldn't possibly have been plotted in the Radiant's psychohistoric equations ahead of time, since that math is contingent on the study of large populations, right? You're following me here? Well, we'll have to keep an eye on this. I do hope the show doesn't make psychohistory begin to apply to individuals, because that would be kind of wrecking the fundamental concept behind the story. Then, about 10 minutes in, there's an important shot, but it's really quick. At 9:52, you see Rafe Selden putting this little metal container before Harry Selden on his desk. We see that same container later in episode 2 when they're in the dining hall on the ship. It has a pill in it that Harry takes. He dies later that night, seemingly not from the pill though, but from Rafe plunging a knife into his chest. Again, what? What is going on here? Why take the knife if you got the pill? I don't know. More on that scene later. But if this pillbox really is foreshadowing Harry Selden's death, that would make a lot of sense considering how heavy this conversation between he and Rafe is. They're talking about how dire their circumstances are.
Everything is dying. That doesn't mean it won't work out. Do you ever wish there was another way? Every day, so.
When you put things that way, the end of episode 2 is slightly less surprising, maybe. I still have a lot of questions about how Harry's death went down. At 10 minutes and 25 seconds in, I just want to note that this watery planet is Synax, and I was probably the first person to call it way back in March. So yeah, I get bragging rights for that. I also do want to note that the music swelling as Gale leaves Synax is excellent. It worked, it got me. I know some folks will be annoyed by comparisons to Star Wars, but it's the most watched sci-fi fantasy motion picture story in our world, so I'm going to compare it sometimes. Gale has some parallels with Rey, and I mean the part of Rey that had me rooting for her, the lonely outcast kid from humble beginnings, but who loved to learn. Gale is pulling on some of those same character strings, and also in other ways she is paralleling Rey's character, but I'll get into that later. For now, I just want to say David Goyer, Lou LaBelle, the composer, Bear McCreary, you've brought me here. I am now transported to this universe for a moment. Nice job, and thank you. We've just started episode 1 here, and about 16 minutes in, we get our first jump through hyperspace, and I appreciate this so much. This is the kind of thing that attempts to ground foundation in the realm of hard science fiction. It doesn't just happen, there's a bit of explanation, there's a bit of world building. Gale gives this line about how the gravity drives on the ship would inhibit navigation to fourth dimensional points at transdimensional speeds. That's not exactly how Asimov described the concept of hyperspace travel in his books. He was also vague, to be sure, but he said hyperspace drives treated all of our familiar three-dimensional space as one point. I suspect both Gale's and Asimov's explanations are not exactly in disagreement with each other. One is just elaborating a little bit more. Since most of us today think that every higher dimension contains all of the points in the dimensions below it while still being a separate thing, then I guess this makes sense. I don't know. Let me know in the comments below if you understand how hyperspace travel works. I'd love to know. The point is, hard science fiction tries to rationalize the world it builds. Seeing these ships create a small black hole at least feels a bit more legit than let's go to light speed, which is actually still pretty slow when you're talking about interstellar travel. For example, at light speed, it would take you or I 4 years to get from Sol, our star, to our closest neighbor, Alpha Centauri. It's a very long time. Another thing that always seemed more believable in the Asimov series were the blasters, and at 22 minutes in the palace, we see this poor painter get blasted, but it is consistent with the books. Cleon even called Harry Seldon Raven Seldon. I love this consistency with the source material. It's great, and I bet David Goyer made a conscious effort to honor the source material so blatantly in this first episode as a way to earn our trust. At 32 minutes in, we get a great line from Harry Seldon. He says, "Math in the wrong hands is a weapon, and in the right hands, it's deliverance." The next scene I want to look at about 37 minutes in is when we have the first major world-building component that is also deviating from the books. You see, Gale visits a seer church, a house of worship for the religion that seems to define laws and customs on the planet Synax. This builds on how she relates, or doesn't, with her community, but also offers an interesting point of interaction for when Brother Dusk later visits this church. I'm going to point out another prop that is directly ripped from the books. I like this consistency, and it's a radio jammer which blocks spy signals. It's good to remember that this story was written toward the end of World War II and in the heydays of the Cold War. So spy gadgets and anti-spy gadgets were made big in this time, which I'm sure inspired Asimov. I also want to draw attention to the shots we have from Trantor, specifically on the palace grounds. The architecture is built with reference to the placement of the space elevator, or sky bridge as they're calling it. There's subtle communication here from a visual, art, cinematography standpoint that this star sky bridge is one of the most important things on the planet, and thus perhaps even in the galaxy. This allows for more impact when it soon is destroyed. The Imperial spy has a chance to ask Gale why she lied about being awake during the jump through hyperspace. She tells him she's scared of being different. There are hints here that Gale isn't just smart and good at math, but that her abilities may be abnormal. I don't know if her abilities are to the degree of the scholars of the Second Foundation, but her mental abilities are definitely astounding here, and it's something that they keep planting within the events unfolding. As an example, there are a few instances where she says something is wrong before there is clear evidence of that being the case. She's the first to notice when the Sky Bridge is being attacked, and in the second episode, she somehow knows that Harry Seldon is not well. When I said she was like Rey, I didn't need for it to be in this way. Again, Gale's abilities border on the fantastic. It's not unprecedented in certain ways. I'm just not sure how I feel about it at this point in the series. Next, I want to get into the climax of this episode, and I really can't believe they did this. Even though some imagery from the trailers suggested it, the whole attack sequence on the Sky Bridge is beat for beat a reference to 9/11 and terrorism in general. The suggestion that it may be perpetrated by non-state actors. They're suicidal, they shouted a prayer or song before death, and it brings down the proudest tower in the proudest city. 20 years, nearly to the day after I remember seeing this happen, and having lived through what's come after, the sequence did have me feeling a bit bitter. But in episode 2, the Empire's reaction was also close to what happened on Earth in the 2000s and up to now. Distant strikes from the sky, overwhelming power, many civilians killed. This points to Asimov's inspiration for his original story. He modeled the fall of the Galactic Empire off the fall of the Roman Empire. Some also call America an empire in decline. Whether you like the comparison or not, the truth is these messages and parallels aren't in the show by accident. David Goyer, the show's creator, did say he intended to adapt this story for modern day, and that it would refer to modern events. That much absolutely seems clear from these first 2 episodes. I mean, there's even a debate about terminating pregnancy in episode 2. Personally, I don't want the show to necessarily feel like a blatant game of how many current events references can we fit in the script, but I also respect an artist's right to make statements in their work. A lot of art features that sort of thing, and if you have the opportunity to make something like this on this scale for public consumption, people expect or enjoy commentary from your work, or they at least want relevance to their lived experience. So that's what's going on here, and it's not going away. Most of our favorite works feature things like this. And without being too philosophical, let's move on to episode 2. First, just my general thoughts on episode 2. Episode 1 matches the beginning of the book Foundation almost beat for beat. Episode 2 completely dives into shaping new subplots for the TV adaptation. You can see how this formula is going to work already. Overarching plot developments, then quieter moments to advance characters and other drama. We all should have seen this coming. How well it's done will depend on the long-term arcs. I'm going to give this a chance. I have mixed feelings about what I've seen so far in the subplots. For one thing, I think Gale counts too much. I mean, I get it, she loves numbers, but did we need that much counting? Who knows, she might be dead now, so maybe I'll miss it in the next episode. Also, did we need to see her and Raish have as much couple time in the episode as they did? I thought it might have been just a little too much time spent developing their relationship. The episode began to feel a little slow at parts in the middle, but then Gale and Raish's developing relationship made the twist at the end that much more striking. I still question the execution, but it might have been worth it at the end. We also need to see what they do next with that, so we'll put a pin in it for now. In general, I got into the Foundation series for the drama, in the sense that the debates over how to navigate a society amid crises was interesting drama to me. Interpersonal conflict always came as an afterthought in my mind. But if this show only told the story as it was told in the books, it'd be over a lot sooner. I mean, think about this. If episode 1 already took care of section 1 of the book Foundation, then we'd be at the Mule and Second Foundation and Gaia by the end of season 2. We would already have pretty much an entirely different cast every episode. Creator David Goyer has said in interviews that he wants this show to be 8 seasons. For that to happen, he's really got to slow down the advancement of time by adding more stories to tell in each era. By doing this, we'll at least see some characters for a season or more. We also know that that's the motivation behind the cloned emperors, a much better use of the concept, in my opinion, than a recent movie about wars and stars just did. Sorry guys, I actually love Star Wars, but I have to trash it sometimes because Foundation is my actual favorite. Now, would I watch a Foundation show adapted exactly from the books? Yeah, I would. I would watch Salvor Hardin sit at a desk and ponder things over a cigar for 25 minutes. But I also know that most people would probably not watch that, especially if they hadn't read the books. And I do encourage everyone to read the books, by the way. I intend to make more videos about the books after this season, but for the time being, I'm going to cover this show, the good points and the not so good ones. Now, let's break this episode down by its key scenes. Episode 2 begins with a very unexpected sequence. In the first scene, Demerzel leads a precise military raid on a bomb-making facility. And again, this show is showing so many parallels to our reality. Raids on bomb-making shops in Europe, the US, and the Middle East have been an important component in counter-terror operations in recent years. That's our non-fiction reality. But what's really nuts, I think, is that Edo Demerzel herself is undertaking this mission. She even interrogates one of the lab workers. This is not the type of scene I expected to see a top palace advisor, but I do like it simply because of how cold she is throughout. Also noteworthy here is that she refers to the explosives implanted in the bombers as subcutaneous nanolace explosives. This is a lot of fun we're having with sci-fi world building here. At about 2 minutes into this episode, we get a chance to see some writing up close. This appears to be in Galactic Standard, which for viewer purposes is English, so we can read it. It's a cool font, no translation is really needed, it just says intruder alert with some letters reversed. We also know from Foundation's Edge or Foundation and Earth, I don't remember which book exactly right now, that the letter F, for example, reversed itself some millennia before the events in this story take place. That's why the F in my channel's logo is shown the way it is. In this raid, they're not using blasters, they're using projectiles that do kinetic damage the way our contemporary crude bullets do. But Demerzel also offers a repair mechanism in exchange for information. I like this slew of weaponry we've already seen in the show. I think in one of the last scenes of episode 1, we may have seen a soldier use a neuronic whip on Raish, which is from the books. It might have been just a stun baton, but Asimov does write of a weapon that basically activates everyone's neurons or nerve endings rather, so that their brain processes pain all over their body. And then of course we saw a real Asimov-style blaster used by the Emperor against that poor painter in the Imperial Palace back in episode 1. At 12 minutes in, Harry meets Gale in a proto-apple orchard type of place in the ship. Now, I bring this scene up because he refers to the Robot Wars, and I don't know exactly what he's talking about here. Is he referring to the war between spacers and Earth beings, or something else entirely made up for the backstory of the show? This far into the future, in the Asimov future timeline, no one is really supposed to remember the existence of robots or Earth or spacers or anything like that. So this is curious. Next scene I found interesting was Brother Day's questioning of the Delegates. We hear again that Anacreon and Thespis hate each other and would not collaborate on an attack on the Empire. Now, if these governments are not behind the recent bombing, then who are these non-state actors and what are their motivations? On the other hand, if these governments did covertly work together, then this is definitely an indicator that the entire Outer Reach is on the precipice of rebellion. Then again, with the Empire's retribution carried out at the end of episode 2, these systems might decide to rebel no matter what the truth of the first attack on the Sky Bridge is. Then at about 18 minutes in, we also get this scene with Brother Dusk, who is painting but falls from a ladder and shows his hand shaking. I think this is a clear subplot in development. He's getting old. Probably some kind of condition that every version of himself has died from is starting to inflict him. This will influence his character, no doubt. It might make him soft, or it might make him want to go out with a bang. In the arc of this episode, he seems to be trending towards soft, so we'll see if I'm wrong about that. Then at 26 minutes in, we get a little clue about what is revealed later in the episode. Edo Demerzel is a robot, and this isn't blood we see when she's tending to her wounds, and we see inner mechanics. Now, this is very different from the books. Basically, Brother Dawn knows that he has a human caretaker, and humans aren't supposed to know what robots are at this point in the Asimov future timeline, as I mentioned earlier. It's unclear if all three brothers know about this, but I would imagine if one does, then the other two have to as well. I mean, when Brother Day and Brother Dusk were at one point Brother Dawn, then I assume they were also taken care of by Demerzel. This would help explain the line earlier when Brother Day asks her if he'll regret exiling Selden and his followers. It wasn't his decision, it seems. These clone emperors might be very aware of their dependency on a robot, and that's a major deviation from the books. There's also a scene that took me a second viewing to fully appreciate. About 30 minutes into episode 2, Gale is in a budget meeting where she makes the point that customs from worlds that are not core worlds in the galaxy must be preserved. Now, if core world customs are heavily favored, then a lot of knowledge and even potential knowledge from the outer worlds will be lost. That's what Gale is saying. Now, and I thought the reference that she made to different counting systems in making this point was pretty cool. Other number systems she didn't mention include our real-life hexadecimal system. And of course, there's binary, which is used for expressing computer circuitry and programs. Shout out to any of you who know different counting systems. Comment below your favorite weird counting system. To be honest with you, I thought the episode around this time did start to get a bit slow. In the middle here, it's like, all right, I get it. You like numbers. You want to make out with Raish. That's fine, but I don't really see where the episode's going. But then, at 44 minutes in, a chain of profound events begin. Harry Selden sits down at a table to eat, and then we get this quick shot of the same metal pillbox that we saw in the beginning of episode 1, when he and Raish were introduced and discussed the reality of their circumstances. Kinda seems like a suicide pill is in this box. Raish, by the way, in the books is indeed Harry's adopted son from Trantor, and that's something that you don't really find out until you read the prequels, which I recommend you do last if you're gonna read the books. I just thought it was really cool to have this world building happen already in the first 2 episodes. Now, you can see that Raish becomes visibly upset in this scene after Harry takes this little pill and their conversation goes south. Gale and Raish then hook up again for like a 4th time, but after that, the climax of this episode is the Empire Strikes Back sequence, where planets are punished, accused dissidents are executed in public to the applause of onlookers, and this is all so very Roman Empire. And then there's a short but weighty exchange in there between Demerzel and Brother Dawn. Dawn asks, how often do we choose ruthless retribution and violence? And Demerzel replies, you always do. This, of course, means that she has witnessed generations of emperors do things like this. That's a pretty bleak note, but it also has really huge implications for Demerzel in particular. You see, robots in the Asimov future timeline are fundamentally governed by 3 laws of robotics. The first law is a robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. Second law is a robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, except when such orders would conflict with the first law. And the third law is a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first and second law. If Demerzel is a robot subject to these 3 laws in her programming, then how does she watch a bunch of people get hanged in front of her without, like, exploding? Then again, she was leading a military raid at the beginning of the episode, so it's possible that her programming has been altered somehow, allowing her to basically survive in the position that she's in. That's kind of frightening, but it's also not an unheard of explanation. We'll see how the show handles this positronic logic, but there is a great reveal in the books, which I won't spoil here. If you read them, you'll understand that Edo Demerzel can hold a lot of surprises. Of course, we can't close out this video without addressing the ending of episode 2, which is just absolute bananas. At 57 minutes in, Gale is nervously counting again and messes up accidentally, counting a non-prime number. And in doing so, she becomes startled, leaves the pool, and runs to Harry Selden's office. How does she know something is wrong? Does she have that kind of connection with Harry? I mean, some people will call each other at the same time. That happens a lot. But is there something more specific going on here? It's hard to tell, and we don't find out any more beyond that because she stumbles upon Raish killing Harry. Importantly, there are some quick shots here. There's Raish peeling something from behind Harry's ear after pulling a knife out of Harry's chest. Harry is clearly heard gasping, and then an alert comes on the ship that his, quote, life functions have ceased. That seems pretty dead to me. Then Raish runs Gale to an escape pod, plants the knife in her pod, and sends her on her way after finally telling her that he loves her. Even more odd, Raish seems entirely conflicted about this. He hates to see her go, but at the same time, this all seems very premeditated. Her escape pod makes some close calls with asteroids, but remains intact, and I wonder if she'll be around, alive and preserved, or if she'll have to slowly die in the middle of nowhere. I really have no idea, but I will say pretty much every shot of her from the trailers have been in these past 2 episodes, so there's no promise if or how soon she'll come back. It's obviously a plotline that producers thought necessary to adapt this story for television. Is it ensuring I'll watch the next episode? Honestly, yeah, so they're not wrong entirely, yet. I'll be back next week to discuss whatever insanity they've decided to include in episode 3. Overall, though, this show is not some low-budget sci-fi show. To me, they're taking a very serious swing at bringing Asimov's vision to the screen. It's already miles closer to the mark than iRobot was, though I know that's a pretty low bar to set. It's also important to note Isaac Asimov's daughter, Robin Asimov, is credited in this production. David Goyer had to run things by her, and I think she knew her dad pretty well. So you'd have to make an effort to ignore those facts if you were to assert this whole thing is complete and utter disrespect to the Asimov name. Now, what do you think of the show so far? Let me know in the comments below. If you like my analysis, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps the channel. Until next time, stay safe, healthy, and thanks for watching.